That, however, covers off most of the improvements introduced in this new patch, which leads us on to the next part of this video, performance. The number of permutations on offer here is massive, and the settings can have a profound impact on both performance and image quality. On the face of it, there's basically two target frame rate options this time, 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, but there's caveats to each based on your settings. So when playing with ray tracing enabled or utilizing the 8K mode, the game will output at 60 Hz max, with a frame rate of 60 frames per second. During normal gameplay, 60 FPS is achieved at nearly all times, whether you have ray tracing enabled or not. Furthermore, even the game's 8K 60 mode manages to hold 60 FPS most of the time. But this is not too surprising given that it seems to be upsampling from around 4K resolution, suggesting that they're doing a 4K to 8K reconstruction, which honestly is pretty impressive. But of course, I wanted to push the performance a little harder and find areas where I could drop the frame rate. And I found one. Essentially, I created a replay featuring a grid of cars in the rain. It's a very heavy scene, which is just enough to tip over the frame rate bucket, but only with specific settings. You see, if you enable ray tracing but disable PSSR, which runs the game at 4K, I was able to drop the frame rate here on this track, just like this. So in this case, using PSSR actually produces faster performance overall. The 8K mode, however, struggles to lock to 60 in this rainy race even when using gameplay views. You can see here that it dips into the 50s both using the chase and cockpit views. Thankfully, with VRR enabled, you're well within the window, making this very acceptable if you're using an 8K screen, and I'd imagine most 8K screens, if not all, support VRR. The real issue crops up with the replays. These are also bumped up to a maximum of 60 frames per second, but they can be more variable overall. The game does a pretty good job of delivering a smooth replay experience even with the cinematic angles under normal circumstances. But the rainy track once again brings the boom, dropping the frame rate significantly, and also revealing a gulf in performance between PSSR and native 4K, specifically when using ray tracing. As you can see, PSSR runs the game on average 10 to 15 frames per second faster. The 8K mode runs the game similarly to the native 4K mode. Given the cost of PSSR and the base resolution from which it's sampling, I'm surprised it's not lower. That said, the cinematic angles take a serious hit on performance. Now, I wanted to highlight this performance gulf between PSSR and native resolution specifically because as we shift over to the 120 frames per second mode, we see an interesting situation appear. When you enable 120 Hz, ray tracing is disabled entirely, no matter your settings, and in most races, you'll get a full 120 frames per second experience using both modes. And it's extremely smooth. It plays great this way and it looks pretty nice still. VRR smooths out any potential dips as well, and from a gameplay perspective, it's clearly the way to go. Sure, you give up ray tracing, but it plays so well at 120 frames per second. But what about the rainy track? Well, this one's not too bad in gameplay angles, but the replays reveal interesting results. Notice something? In this instance, the native resolution side runs the game faster than PSSR. What this says to me is that without ray tracing enabled, the bottleneck shifts to PSSR, which has a roughly 2 millisecond cost per frame. Thus, with the extra GPU resources freed up through disabling ray tracing, PSSR actually becomes more expensive when targeting these higher frame rates. Thus, if you're using the 120 Hz mode, I actually recommend disabling PSSR entirely. But wait, there's one caveat. When using the game's quality mode at 4K 120, PSSR is actually slightly faster than the TAA mode, and only when watching replays using the TV camera. In every other scenario, PSSR is actually slower when using the 4K 120 mode, so it's kind of an unexpected weird little twist to this whole saga, I think. It may simply come down to the resolution itself. You see, the performance mode does seem to drop the resolution. I counted 1800p in several shots, whereas the prioritize resolution/quality mode aims for native 4K. It is worth mentioning that the Performance Pro mode in 120Hz is definitely upgraded from the base system, which dropped the resolution all the way to 1080p. Either way, I thought the results were pretty interesting in this case. But as I noted before, in every other scenario, the native resolution mode is faster than PSSR when outputting 120Hz, which obviously is going to be most important during gameplay, where that extra performance actually matters, and here native resolution always seems to have the advantage.